all going to tell you some adventures of a puppet.
A puppet who wanted more than anything to become a real boy.
His name was Pinocchio.
On that fateful day, Geppetto the toy maker sharpened his sharpest knife and began to carve the funny little piece of wood he'd been saving. He was a lonely old man, and he was going to make a puppet to keep him company. As he worked, Geppetto talked to himself. "Funny little piece of wood, you shall have a very special name. I shall call you Pinocchio. Well, Pinocchio, here's your hair. And here's your forehead. And here are your eyes. Pinocchio, Pinocchio, stop blinking your eyes so I can carve your nose." But as soon as the nose was finished, it began to grow and grow and grow. Geppetto kept cutting it. The more he cut it, the longer it grew. Finally, he just let it alone and began carving the mouth. But as soon as the mouth was finished, "Pinocchio, stop that at once!" The mouth became silent, and then the old toy maker carved the chin, the neck, the shoulders, the arms, and the hands. When the hands were finished, "Ouch! Pinocchio, let go of my ear! You are not yet finished, and you are already being rude to your father. Very bad, my son, very bad." Soon Geppetto had completed the legs and feet and put Pinocchio on the floor to teach him to walk. "That's right. First one foot, then the other. Not so fast. Not so fast, Pinocchio. Pinocchio, come back here." But Pinocchio had run out through the open front door of the toy maker's shop and down the street. Geppetto ran after him, but the little puppet was too fast for him. The little puppet ran happily down the streets and through the alleys. But soon it began to rain. And the wind blew. And flashes of lightning shot across the sky. Pinocchio fought his way through the storm and finally, exhausted, found his way back to the toy maker's shop. But Geppetto was not there. He was somewhere out in the storm still looking for Pinocchio. As the puppet looked around the shop with its hobby horses and rocking chairs with music boxes and rows of wooden soldiers, he realized then that he was very hungry. Well, he found a big jar of lollipops that Geppetto kept for the children, and he ate and ate until he had eaten every one. And then he propped his feet up on the hot stove to dry out and promptly fell asleep. He awakened when he heard the sound of Geppetto coming back to the shop. He jumped up and crashed to the floor. Poor Pinocchio. He had burned his wooden feet off on the hot stove.
"Father! Father, please make me a new pair of feet."
"What, so you can run away again?"
"I won't run away anymore, Father. I promise. I promise."
"Very well. But I want you to be good from now on. And if you are, someday you may become a real boy."
"A real boy? Oh, that'd be great."
Now the first thing
"Yes,
you have to do
yes, yes."
is go to school.
"School?
Pinocchio!
I'm sorry. All right, Father. I'll go to school."
Good boy. And Geppetto made Pinocchio a new pair of feet and a hat and a coat out of colored paper. Took a few pennies from the piggy bank and bought him a spelling book. And with that, Pinocchio kissed Geppetto goodbye and was off to school. It was a cool, crisp morning when Pinocchio started out for his first day in school with his spelling book under his arm. In the distance, he could hear the sound of the school bell. But then, he heard another sound. closer and more exciting. He followed the sound of the music until suddenly he found himself in the middle of a square full of people. They were all crowding around a wooden building painted red and yellow and purple and orange and green. Flags were flying from the top. In the distance, Pinocchio could still hear...
I must go to school. I ought to go to school. I really should go to school.
Ladies and gentlemen, step right up, you know. Only a nickel to see the greatest puppet show in the world. Yeah.
I'll go to school tomorrow. Gee, I wish I had a nickel. But how am I going to get one? I know. Ladies and gentlemen, step right up. Only a nickel to buy the greatest spelling book in the world.
Well, Pinocchio soon sold his spelling book and followed the crowd into the theater. The puppet show was just starting. Suddenly, one of the puppets saw Pinocchio sitting near the back of the theater and called out,
"It's Pinocchio. Hello, Pinocchio. Look, everybody. Look who's here. It's Pinocchio, our cousin Pinocchio."
All the puppets ran out on the stage and began to call,
"Come on up, cousin Pinocchio. Come on up."
With one leap, Pinocchio was in the front row of seats. A second leap, and he landed on the orchestra leader's head. A third leap, and he was on the stage. There was hugging and kissing and great shrieks of joy among the puppets. But the audience was growing impatient. Someone called out,
What foolishness! The play! Go on with the play!
but the puppets paid no attention and made twice as much noise as before.
Here! Silence here! Silence! Back to your places, you stupid puppets! Yes!
It was the bearded lady, keeper of the puppets. She had a long black beard down to her toes and a mouth as big as an oven. Her eyes were like two glowing red coals, and in her huge hairy hands she carried a long whip made of green snakes and cat's tails. At the sight of her, all the puppets trembled with fear and went back to their places to go on with the play. The bearded lady dragged Pinocchio behind the puppet theater and into her kitchen where a lamb was roasting over an open fire.
What's your name, you little pest?
Pinocchio.
You look like you're made of well-seasoned wood, Pinocchio, you silly puppet. Yes.
She took Pinocchio by the leg and started to throw him into the fire. Pinocchio began to wiggle and squirm.
Help! Help! I don't want to die! Somebody save me! Please! Somebody save me!
No, oh dear, shoo!
Gesundheit.
Thank you. Chew. Excuse me.
You should take hot tea and lemon for your cold.
Cold? No, I'm not getting a cold. No. You see, I look terribly fierce with this stupid beard, you know, but I'm really a very soft-hearted person, yes. And seeing you so unhappy has made me unhappy, too. And whenever I'm unhappy, shoo! I sneeze. Tell me, do you have a home, Pinocchio?
Oh, yes, Your Honor, Your Majesty. I have a very nice home and a very nice father named Geppetto.
Well, what are you standing there for? Go home, for the heaven's sake, you silly puppet. Go home. That's shoo!
Pinocchio flew out of the puppet theater and into the street. It was much too late in the day to go to school, but it didn't matter. He would go to school tomorrow. And so Pinocchio went to school. And you'll remember the advice that Geppetto had given him on that first day. And do you know how Pinocchio had listened to his father's advice? By paying no attention to the teacher, throwing spitballs, copying from his neighbor, pulling girls' hair, and fighting on the playground. And he was about to do the worst thing of all. It was nearly midnight, and Pinocchio sneaked out of the house to meet Candlewick. Candlewick, the laziest, naughtiest boy in the school, and his dearest friend.
No, I wouldn't say that. Psst. Hey, Pinocchio.
Pinocchio.
Candlewick. Candlewick, why did you ask me to meet you here on the highway? Where are you going?
I'm catching the midnight stagecoach to the land of the
Dodos.
How's that?
Thought you'd like to come along.
Well, sure, Candlewick, but what's the land of the Dodos?
That's a place where there are
No schools, and no teachers, and no books.
every week has 6 Saturdays and a Sunday, and vacations begin on the first day of January and end on the last day in December.
Gee, that sounds great, Candlewick, but if I go to the land of the Dodos, I'll never get to be a real boy.
You a real boy? That's a lot of nonsense. Look,
What?
here comes the stagecoach. Roll aboard for the land of the Dodos. Come on, boys, get in, get in.
All right, Candlewick, I'll go.
Well, they got into the stagecoach, which was packed full of other boys, and was drawn by 12 pairs of donkeys. Well, Pinocchio loved the land of the Dodos right away. There were crowds and crowds of boys everywhere, and the place was filled with laughter and noise. A few of the boys spent their days playing baseball. Other boys played marbles. But most of the boys spent all their time playing cards,
Who deals?
and dice,
You're faded.
and pool.
Bet $1.
Well, so did Pinocchio. But one morning, after he'd been in the land of the Dodos for quite a while, he woke up feeling very strange. He opened his mouth and... He rushed to a mirror and saw that he had turned into a donkey. Then he ran through the streets and found that all the other boys he had come with had also turned into donkeys. The stagecoach driver gathered them all together and said,
Boys, I mean, of course, donkeys. You are now going to the marketplace to be sold. Now move along there. Egad, this batch should turn a nice profit.
At the marketplace, Pinocchio saw his friend Candlewick sold to an old farmer. And before he even had a chance to say goodbye, Pinocchio was sold to the circus. Poor Pinocchio. They taught him to jump through a flaming hoop. And he did it so well that soon he was the star of the circus. One day, before a great crowd of people who had come especially to see him, he crashed into the hoop and fell in a heap on the floor. When he stood up, his leg hurt him terribly. He was lame. He would never jump again. The circus had no use for a lame donkey. Very few people did. And Pinocchio was finally sold for 10 cents to a man who wanted to make a drum from his skin. Since the man didn't want a live donkey, he led Pinocchio to the ocean, tied a stone around his neck, and dropped him in to drown. Poor Pinocchio. He sank deeper and deeper and deeper. It looked like the end had come. But then, a fish swam by and began to nibble at the donkey skin. Then another, and another, and another. Soon the fish had eaten away the whole donkey skin, and Pinocchio was free.
I'm free! I'm free! I'm me again!
He began to swim as fast as his arms and legs would move. Now he would really be a good boy and make his father proud of him. He swam as hard as he could toward shore. As Pinocchio was swimming toward shore, he heard behind him something that sounded like a giant tea kettle. But this was no tea kettle. He turned and saw that he was being chased by a tremendous whale. He swam faster and faster and faster. But the whale kept getting closer and closer and closer. And finally, swallowed Pinocchio. Pinocchio slid down the whale's throat and into his stomach.
Gee, but it's dark down here and so damp.
Then, in the distance, Pinocchio saw a tiny light. He walked toward it. And as he drew near, he saw the light was coming from a candle. The candle stood on a small table. Next to the table sat an old man with long white hair. The old man turned toward him. Pinocchio was astonished.
Father! Father, it's you!
Pinocchio! Pinocchio! They threw their arms around each other. For a long time, they just couldn't talk. They just hugged each other with joy. Then Geppetto told Pinocchio how he had sold the toy shop and set out in a small rowboat to look all over the world for him, and how the whale had swallowed him in a great storm at sea.
But Father, didn't you ever try to escape from the whale?
Pinocchio, I can't swim.
I'm a fine swimmer. I'll carry you on my shoulders. Come on, we'll get out of here.
They walked through the whale's stomach, climbed up his throat, and into his mouth. Then they had a bit of good luck. The whale had just come back from the Arctic Ocean where he'd caught a very bad cold. His nose was all stuffed up and he was breathing with his mouth open. Pinocchio and Geppetto gently tiptoed between two of the whale's front teeth and slipped out into the ocean. The whale didn't see them because he was busy chasing a ship which had appeared on the horizon. As Pinocchio swam with Geppetto on his back, he began to feel his strength leaving him. He prayed he could make it to shore, but there was still a long, long way to go. And then he could swim no further. Just as they began to sink, the sound of great coughing filled the air. The whale had caught the ship and swallowed it down the wrong pipe. His great coughs were making gigantic waves, and on one of them, Pinocchio and Geppetto were swept safely to shore. Although they had reached safety, they had no place to go. Geppetto's money was gone, and Pinocchio could see that the old man was very sick from his long hardships inside the whale's stomach. They went back to their village, where a kind neighbor let them make his barn their home. And every morning, Pinocchio went to school. But this time, he studied so hard that he brought home all A's on his report card, except for a C+ in arithmetic. After school, Pinocchio would give Geppetto his medicine, clean the barn, and go out to make money for them to live on. He mowed lawns, delivered newspapers, and washed dishes in a restaurant. He worked very hard, and he really didn't mind at all. He was working to help his father, who had suffered so much because of him. But Geppetto needed more food and medicine than the little puppet could buy. Instead of getting better, he got worse. One night, when Pinocchio came home from working in the restaurant, he found Geppetto so weak that it seemed like the old man couldn't live another day. Pinocchio fell into bed crying bitterly.
What am I going to do? What shall I do?
He fell asleep exhausted. The next morning, when he awoke, he was almost afraid to open his eyes. Finally, he did. He rubbed them with his little hands. His hands! His hands were real! He looked at his feet. Why, they were real too. He was real all over. He was a real boy. He sprang out of bed.
I'm real. Father! Father, I'm a boy! I'm a real boy!
But Geppetto was not in his bed. He was nowhere in the barn. Pinocchio ran out of the barn, and there, sitting at a little bench carving wooden soldiers, was Geppetto.
Father!
His cheeks were round and pink, his eyes were bright, and he was the picture of good health. They looked at each other in amazement. Ah, Pinocchio. Pinocchio, once I told you that if you were very good, you would turn into a real boy. Ah, this makes me very happy, my son.
But what about you, Father? You're well again.
It's all part of the same miracle, Pinocchio. All part of the same miracle.
I'm Pinocchio, 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 Pinocchio. No longer am I made of wood. I'm now a boy 'cause I've been good.
You're now a boy, 'cause you've been good.
I'm now a boy 'cause I've been good.